So picture this. It's late 2025, and a legal time bomb is just ticking away in Washington, D.C. One that promised to finally blow the lid off some long buried secrets. But what happens when the truth is a whole lot messier than anyone ever expected? Right, let's just dive straight in because this is the question at the heart of one of the most politically charged stories of the year. It's a story all about transparency, about power, and about a huge stash of documents that the public was, demanding to see. So, where did this all begin? Well, it kicked off with a new law, one specifically designed to finally bring some sunlight to one of the darkest scandals in recent memory. The idea behind the Epstein Files Transparency Act was really simple on paper. Make the Department of Justice open up its books. Period. The goal was no more secrets, no more guessing games, just a full, unvarnished look at all the government files connected to Jeffrey Epstein and his whole network. And you've got to understand, this was not happening in some quiet, orderly fashion, not at all. At the exact same time this Epstein deadline was bearing down, Congress was in what they called a frantic 3-week sprint to renew healthcare subsidies for literally millions of Americans. The entire government was just under this immense pressure cooker, which made this whole thing even more intense. So the deadline comes. The government makes its move. But the result? Well, it was a far cry from the clean, simple answer everyone was hoping for. You see, the law promised this giant floodlight of transparency, right? But what the public actually got felt more like a single, flickering candle in a dark room. Yeah, the government technically met the deadline, but the initial release was just a tiny piece of the puzzle, and a lot of the key info was blacked out, heavily redacted. Over the next few days, a few more documents trickled out. We're talking flight logs, police files, some grand jury materials. But as people started digging through the more than 10,000 pages, a feeling started to set in. Everyone was coming to the same conclusion. There was no new smoking gun. The big secrets, it seemed, were still secret. And the frustration was immediate. And here's the key part. It was bipartisan. That almost never happens. The actual authors of the act, Democrat Ro Khanna and Republican Thomas Massie, came out and said it publicly. The Justice Department had failed to live up to the promise of the law. Now, this whole fight over the files wasn't happening in a bubble. It was actually part of a much bigger stress test that was playing out across the entire American system of government that month. At about the same time, another branch of government was also pushing back on executive power. The Supreme Court issued a finding that basically put limits on the president's power to deploy the National Guard here at home. It was another really clear signal of these checks and balances at work, showing all this tension between the different power centers in Washington. Okay, so let's get back to the Epstein files. With all this criticism building up, the Justice Department finally came out and revealed why everything was so delayed. And wow. The scale of the problem was just staggering. 5.2 million. That's the number. Just let that sink in for a second. 5.2 million. That is the total number of Epstein-related pages the Department of Justice says it has to review. And their argument is pretty straightforward. They're saying, look, the sheer volume here is overwhelming. Plus, they have a legal duty to go through every single page to protect victim privacy and make sure they're complying with the law. They said this massive task was going to stretch well into 2026. And with that, the stage was set for a huge political showdown heading into the new year. A fight over transparency, timing, and ultimately, trust. This is where the accusations got really sharp and political. High-profile critics like Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer, they just weren't buying the DOJ's explanation. They basically accused the administration of deliberately slow-walking the release, maybe even hiding politically damaging information. And no surprise here, both parties started using this whole mess to push their own narratives. Democrats hammered on the need for full accountability for the survivors. At the same time, some Republicans started raising flags about selective prosecution, asking whether all of Epstein's associates were being investigated equally. So you can see how this went from being about a document release to a full-blown political firestorm. And the questions hanging over Washington are simple, but they're explosive. What is in the rest of those 5.2 million pages, and who is still being protected? Which really just leaves us with this final thought. A law was passed to bring these secrets into the light, but the sheer size of the secrets has now caused this massive delay. And it really makes you ask the question, when accountability gets put on hold like this, who's the one that really pays the price? Is it the victims, still waiting for justice?
Or is it all of us, watching our trust in the system itself start to fade?